everybody, welcome back. This is a bit left field, this one, but I'm starting a new playlist this week, which is this. It's Tamiya's brand new, in the UK, 1/48 scale F-35A Lightning II. And it's a new kit that just arrived in the UK last week. This is one of the first copies into the UK. It's not the sort of kit that I would usually build for myself. This is for someone else. And for that reason, I wanted to make an early start on it. If you follow the channel, you'll know that I'm also building the Zukimura 132 scale 109. Well, that's at the back of the bench there, ready for the fuselage to be painted. I'll be doing that after the Christmas break. And you'll know that I'm also on with the 200 scale trumpeter Bismarck as well behind me in the case. Both of those builds will carry on, and I'll fit the F-35 in when I get a natural break in those other two builds. So I'll be building this one more or less straight from the box. I've just got some 3D seat belts for the seat on order, but that's the extent of the aftermarket. Now, I'm no expert on the F-35, so I hope that Tamiya have got their research right, because I'll just build this straight from the box. So I'm looking forward to this one. It's an unusual aircraft. It's a little bit different. And the design of the aircraft lends itself to Tamiya's engineering. Some of the ways in which Tamiya have approached the breakdown of the parts is really interesting. So hopefully it'll make for an interesting build as well. So I'm going to make a start this week in this first video building the first 5 or 6 stages of the Tamiya instructions. So that includes the cockpit, the air intakes, the engine intakes, and parts of the upper fuselage as well. So we'll get the box open and let's make a start on this one. Okay, so we're all ready to go, and I'll be probably getting through the first 5 or 6 steps in the Tamiya instructions in this first part of the playlist. So it's mainly centering around sorting the base part of the cockpit out. So we're not going to be doing the ejector seat or the instrument panel, they're going later. But we'll put the cockpit tub together, and also the nose wheel bay, and hopefully the beginnings of the intakes as well. So that's what we're going to be aiming for this first part of the series. So we'll get some of these parts cut off and let's make a start. So the very first thing to do is to prepare the upper fuselage, which is this one-piece moulding in the Tamiya kit. So the detail's really nice on the kit generally. We've got all the radar suppression panels moulded into the top of this fuselage section. And the version that I'm going to be building, which is the US version, version A in the kit, needs all these panels picking out. They're all outlined. And Tamiya provide decals for all that work. So that's something to look forward to. But first job, let's get this piece cleaned up, get it off the sprue. For our version, we just need to drill these holes out for the underside, from the underside. So that's all there is to the cockpit really at this stage. We've got the two side walls, the rudder pedals and the two control handles. So I'll just put those to one side and we can do all the priming of the parts for this first stage together. So this is the nose wheel bay, which is made up from several parts. As you can see, these nose wheel bay, the weapons bay, they're all very highly detailed in the Tamiya kit. So just test fitting the parts for the nose gear bay, and I'm going to paint the bulkheads, the sidewalls, separately because the detail is so undercut that it's not going to be possible to get paint properly underneath all this detail. So I'll paint them flat, do all the weathering washes on them and then assemble them afterwards. But I'll just make sure that all the parts are going to go together all right. The engineering on this kit, as is common with a lot of Tamiya kits, is very clever. The way that the bulkheads slot together on this, they're all keyed, so it's not possible to assemble them the wrong way around. But one thing is, this nose gear leg is designed so that you've got to fit it at the same time as installing the bulkheads, so we'll have to remember to do that. And what Tamiya intend us to do is to remove this block at the back. This block's just preventing the leg rotating, as you can see. So when we're ready to go onto the step where we lift the nose gear leg, you have to cut this off. But I'm not sure about that really. I think it's a bit of a waste of time, so I'm going to cut that off now, then I can paint the leg. And if I need to, I'll just tape that down into position so it doesn't flap around. So that will go in something like that. The other deviation I'm going to make from the Tamiya instructions is to put all the detail parts on the gear leg, because I don't want to be adding those after I've painted the main part in white. So we've got the scissor links or the torque links at the bottom of the leg and a reservoir here that fits onto the back. So I'll put those on now and then I can be getting them painted with the rest of the leg. The next and last bit of preparation for this stage of the build are the intakes, and Tamiya mould these in two sections on each side, but the location is really positive. They're really clever connection lugs on the intakes that make sure you get them perfectly aligned. And the intakes are a really unusual shape on the F-35. Obviously they come down to a single intake at the back here, and they're a really sharp curve and narrow a lot here just at the neck. The two sides join together in the kit really positively with these large lugs, and we have two more on top which locate the whole assembly onto the upper fuselage. So when that's in the correct place, you can see that the inside face of the intake aligns with the top of the fuselage just here. So that fit is absolutely perfect, and it's the main reason why now and again I like to build a Tamiya kit straight out of the box. They very rarely present you with any problems, and although it's quite a complex aircraft and an unusual aircraft, the engineering on a kit like this really makes it as simple as possible. So as I say, nice relaxing build. So those are the components for this first part. So we've got the cockpit, the upper fuselage, the intakes and the nose undercarriage bay. So the first thing I'm going to do before painting is give all these coats a coat of Mr. Surfacer 1500, that's the finishing surfacer, and I'll do that just before we get them painted. Okay, so a coat of Mr. Surfacer on all these parts now. I've gone ahead and done the base coat of paint on the cockpit assemblies. That's Tamiya XF-54, which is dark sea grey. So the next thing to do is to paint the white for the nose gear bay and the intakes. So for that I'll be using some Tamiya lacquer gloss white. Okay, so on with the painting now, and I started off by painting the undercarriage bay parts in gloss white. That's Tamiya lacquer gloss white, and that's given a really nice finish to that, but it did take a while to cover the Mr. Surfacer grey. So I just had an idea about painting the intakes, or priming the intakes, with Mr. Surfacer white. So that's this, it's Mr. Surfacer Base White 1000. And I just applied that with the intention of covering it over with some gloss white. But actually, when I applied it, it gave a really nice finish to these intakes. It's dried a nice satin white, which is what I like for jet intakes. It just represents the paint finish on those a little bit better than either a pure gloss or a pure flat paint. So I'm going to leave those as they are in the primer, and they just need the forward edges painting out in the upper surface colour. When these go together, actually there's very little of the intake that can be seen, as I think I mentioned earlier on. It's a very tight curve round to the engine face, and in fact I'm staring down there at the moment and you can only just see a tiny little bit of the engine face. So I'm not going to go to town on that when I come to fit all this together. So a little bit of a find there. Sometimes you come across these things by accident, and that's a technique using that satin primer in future. Now going back to the undercarriage bay now, and I just want to pick out some of this really good Tamiya detail with a bit of a weathering wash. And for that I'm using Tamiya's panel line accent colour. This is the dark grey variety. I don't like to use a pure black on white, it just looks a bit too stark, so this dark grey just tones that down a little bit. I've already done the front and rear bulkheads and this side, but I've got the roof to do and this other side, so I'll do that now. The thing with these Tamiya washes is you've got to make sure that they're really well mixed. They do tend to settle at the bottom, as most paints do, but the grey particularly is really washed out if you don't get the pigment properly mixed in it. So give it a good shake. And with these I'm just going to use the fine brush in the Tamiya applicator to just dot some of this grey on. And because these have been painted in gloss white, the wash really sticks into the detail, doesn't stain the rest of the surface, and I don't like that really on undercarriage bays, on white bays. As you know, I don't weather models very heavily, so I find this just the sort of finish that I prefer. Tamiya also do a light grey weathering wash, which I haven't tried actually, or at least I think I might have tried it once and I just found it very, very pale. It was almost invisible even on a white background, but this darker grey is just a little bit heavy, it just shows a little bit more. You see there's a lot of detail in this, it takes a while to get round. So I'll let that dry now, and then I'll just clean up one or two little areas with a cotton bud. And we've got some decals to fit on some of these boxes, and then an overall coat of satin varnish, and they'll be ready to put together. I've already washed the nose gear leg, and that's really popped the detail out on the Tamiya moulding, so that again is ready to go in. What I'll do here on the oleo is to cover that with some bare metal foil. I've got some chrome bare metal foil that I'll use to apply around that. Just cleaning up the wash with a cotton bud. There's not much work to do here because I put so little on. So just a bit of a quick wipe round. And I've done the same with the two side walls and the front and back bulkheads. And they're ready for one or two decals to fit on the boxes here on the side walls. So we'll do that next, and I've also got some decals for the cockpit. This has been painted in Tamiya F-35A, which is dark sea grey, and I've given it a dry brush with some sky grey just to pick out the edges. Then it's had a coat of Mr. GX Super Clear, that's the gloss Super Clear, ready for the decals. Then I'll flat these down and do some detail painting on them as well. But just need to get the decals on these side consoles first. So I'm going to use some Mark Fit Strong for these decals because they've got to go over a little bit of raised detail, not too much. And this is just a little bit more powerful than the standard Mark Fit. But no doubt you've got your own solutions of choice for applying decals. I sometimes use Microset and Microsol. But for Tamiya decals, I generally use Mark Fit. Okay, time to get the nose gear bay together. So these have all been pre-painted and detail painted separately. And these really would just slot together, I think. I don't think they even need any cement on them. The fit is so good and they all interlock the parts. So I don't think there's much prospect of those moving. I will just secure them with a spot of glue from the underside, just to make absolutely sure. And I don't really remember at the beginning of the video, I made a note to myself not to forget to put this leg in. And what's the first thing that I've done? The other thing that I forgot to do was to put some of this bare metal foil chrome around the oleo. So I'll have to try and do that now. It's much easier to do the leg off the model, but I think bare metal foil makes a much better job of oleo legs than paint. Even the best chrome paint would struggle to get that sort of effect. And when it's burnished on like that, I think it looks really nice on an undercarriage leg. Okay, so that's the undercarriage bay, the nose gear bay, finished. And that's ready to install in this part, which is the front fuselage, or the front underside of the fuselage. And the nose gear bay fits in really positively. There are 3 connections for it on the inside of the nose, and that clips in really nicely. It's a really nice fit, as you'd expect. So that will go in next, but I've got to fit the interior of the boarding ladder, which is this. This is the housing for the boarding ladder, and that first of all goes on the inside face. So you can see I've pre-painted the interior here. That's what Tamiya recommend. I've also painted the opening on the outside of the fuselage there in the white. So the first thing we've got to do is get this interior for the step fitted. I want to make sure that's a strong bond because I don't want that pushing in once the nose is assembled. With that in place, we can get the bay in. Don't you just love it when you can hear a click when a part goes into place? So that's the underside nose assembly done for this stage at least. The nice thing about the way Tamiya have engineered that bay is that all the location points are well away from the actual mating surface here along the edge. You don't have to put any cement along this edge. And often when you're fitting an undercarriage bay, you do have to glue that face there. And it's difficult to do that without the cement showing. But not in this case, because those location points are well away from the actual mating surface of the bay itself. So I'll just put that to one side. There is a little bit more work to do here when we get this finally assembled onto the airframe. This section here has got a transparency to fit, which goes over this section, and it contains the forward facing sensor or probe on the underside of the nose there. But for now, that's that section done. Now coming back to the cockpit, the decals have dried and I've given this a coat of satin varnish. And you could see that I was having a little bit of trouble with the Tamiya decals, as I usually do. And the main problem was that they weren't really grabbing very quickly, so in the end I used some of this Tamiya decal adhesive. This is the softener type. They also do a standard adhesive without the softener in, but for these, because they were also fairly thick, I used the softener type. So the Mark Fit Strong that I used at the beginning really wasn't that effective on them, so I abandoned that and I used a combination of the adhesive with Microsol, which eventually got them to settle down. So they look nice now, and I've just got some detail painting to do on the cockpit. Okay, so that's all we need to do, just a few bits picked out in black. There's a panel at the side that needs filling in, and I did that with the airbrush actually. I thought it was better to mask that off and get a smarter finish on it rather than using a brush. But there's not much to it really, so we can get the side panels fitted. Now I want to come back to the intakes and get these built, but they just require a bit more painting. We've got to paint the forward part of them in the airframe colour, the main airframe colour. So for the main airframe, Tamiya call out a mixture of LP14, a lacquer paint, which is IJN grey, one of the 3 IJN greys that are produced by Tamiya, and LP59, which is NATO brown. I don't have the colours in the lacquer paint range, but Tamiya have recently produced the same colours in the standard acrylic range. So the equivalents are XF87 and XF68, and they call for a mix of 7 parts XF87 to 1 part XF68. So I've done that mixture, and it's a slightly unusual colour really. You just get a slight, it's almost a lilac sort of tint to the grey. So it's definitely a very interesting colour. I've never seen anything quite like that before. But I'll just trust what Tamiya are telling us with that. In the end, what I used was 1.5 jars of the grey, which is 15 millilitres, and that allowed me to put just over 2 millilitres of the brown in it. So that's close enough. And there's plenty there to do the whole airframe, I hope. Anyway, I don't have to mix it again. So what I'm going to have to do is mask off these forward areas, and we'll get those painted up, and we can put the intakes together, and I'll also put the engine face on as well. Okay, so after quite a bit of work, I have to say, with the masking tape, the shape means that you've got to use gradually thicker pieces of tape, starting with a very thin 1mm band I used to conform to the dividing line. So let's see what this grey mix looks like. Okay, that's the grey on, and I don't know what to make of it really. It's well, it's unusual, let's put it like that. And it has the effect actually of looking grey from some angles, and it gets a little bit browner from other angles. It's very odd. But anyway, I'll stick to it and trust what Tamiya have called out in the mixture. And get the masking off, make sure we've got a nice straight demarcation between the white and the brown. Well, I'm not very happy with that really. It's not a very good job at all. I've got a little bit of overspray on these outer faces, and the way I get rid of those is just a bit of Tamiya polishing compound on this, really it's a bit of a sanding stick, a polishing stick. Okay, so they're all cleaned up. I could have saved myself a job there by being a bit more careful with the masking, but they're alright now and they're ready to go together. Seen before that they just clip together like that, but I will add a little bit of glue, not all the way along the line. I don't want the glue seeping out into the intake, so I'll just cement the tabs where Tamiya have overlapped the tabs here. They've gone together alright. It's a bit of a puzzle really why Tamiya have gone to the lengths of putting all the engine face detail on there. Just a plain blank would have done just as well. So the intake fits into the upper fuselage, and we have these two studs on top which fit into these two plugs on the upper face. So they give a really positive location, and when that's in the right position you can see that the fuselage here joins up with these plates on the entrance to the intake. And the other thing to bear in mind is just to paint the forward edge of the fuselage here in the grey colour. So that just finishes off the entrance to the intake on the upper surface. But that is an absolutely incredible fit. Those side plates just come together exactly in the right position. It's absolutely fantastic engineering. But we don't put that in yet because it has to attach actually to this underside nose piece. like that, and then that whole assembly drops onto the upper fuselage. So we'll get some glue on that and do that attachment. So we can leave that to set before we attempt to fit it to the upper fuselage. So this entire assembly, when it's dry, glues onto the upper fuselage, and it's an absolutely perfect fit all the way along the join line there. So I'll get that glued up, leave it to set until next time when we'll pick the build up again. Okay, so that's the first 6 stages of the Tamiya instructions dealt with, which is basically dealing with the upper fuselage. Next time I'm going to be looking at the underside of the fuselage, and I'll be building the weapons bay and the undercarriage bay. But just coming back to a reference I made earlier on in the video about this grey-brown mix, and I think I said that it was for the whole of the fuselage, but I was wrong with that. It's only certain panels that are picked out in that particular mix, including this intake panel that I painted earlier on. But the rest of the fuselage is mixed from another of Tamiya's IGN greys. I think it's a slightly darker one. Again mixed with the brown. So I'll be doing that when I come to paint the fuselage. But it's just a note in case you were heading off and painting your F-35 in that original mix. So I'll be coming back to that in a week or so. I'm going to be having a break over the Christmas holidays for the next few days at least, and then I'll be back on the channel with an update on the BF-109. I've got that ready for painting the fuselage, and of course there'll be another update on the 1/200 scale Bismarck next week as well, I hope. So if you're celebrating Christmas, I hope you have a great one, and a Happy New Year to everybody. In the meantime, look after yourselves, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.